This is Hannibal here from the HannibalTV.com, and today, as a very special guest, we have Professor Avi Loeb, who is very decorated as far as his accomplishments. He received a PhD in plasma physics at only 24 from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He also was a longtime member at the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton, and he currently is at Harvard University, where he was a former chair of the department that he's tenured in now, which I believe is astronomy. He's the author of 4 books and nearly 700 research articles, and has made the news last year regarding his latest book, Extraterrestrial, the first sign of intelligent life beyond Earth. So it's an honor to have you. How are you doing tonight, sir?
Doing great. Nice to be with you.
What is the latest on your research? We saw you on Joe Rogan last year talking about Oumuamua, which is a piece of space debris that you believed was potentially extraterrestrial in nature. Any new developments in the past year regarding that?
Yeah, there are many interesting developments. So first of all, that was the first object reported that came from outside the solar system that was detected by astronomers at a telescope in Hawaii. It was moving too fast to be bound to the sun, and it definitely came from outside the solar system. Didn't look like the rocks that are familiar to us. It was flat in shape, most likely at the 90% confidence, and had an extreme shape and was also pushed away from the sun by some mysterious force without showing any cometary tail. So I wrote a book about it. I published some papers arguing that it could be artificial in origin because that kind of a push can result from reflecting sunlight. The sunlight itself could push it if it's thin enough, sort of like a sail. And then 3 years later, that's after my book came out, was written actually, and there was another object discovered by the same telescope in Hawaii, and it was given the name 2020 SO, and it shared the same qualities as Oumuamua. It was pushed away from the sun by reflecting sunlight and had no cometary tail whatsoever. There was no evaporation. And then a few weeks later, the astronomers who discovered it realized it's actually a rocket booster that was launched by NASA in 1966, and it had thin walls. It was made of stainless steel, and we know that it's artificial in origin, and that's why it didn't have a cometary tail. There was no evaporation, and it had thin walls, and that's why it was pushed by reflecting sunlight. So we know this object 2020 SO was artificial because we made it. The question is, who made Oumuamua? And also in 2019, I was invited for an interview, a radio interview about a meteor. And I wanted to read some more about it. I found a catalog that the US government compiled of meteors. These are objects, usually space rocks from the solar system, that when they collide with Earth, they burn up in the atmosphere. At least part of them burns up. And then there was a catalog of 273 such objects from the US government that monitors the sky for ballistic missiles with satellites and so forth. And I asked my student, Amir Siraj, to go through the catalog and look for the fastest moving meteors. Perhaps one of them came from outside the solar system. And we found one that was discovered in 2014. And then we wrote a paper about it. And 3 years later, this year, actually, in March 2022, there was a letter written by the US Space Command under the Department of Defense to NASA, confirming that this object indeed came from outside the solar system at the 99.999% confidence. So they basically confirmed our finding. And this object came almost 4 years before Oumuamua. It was much smaller, about the size of a basketball. but we could see it not from the reflection of sunlight. We could see it because it burned up in the atmosphere. And then the government also released the information about the fireball that was created when it burned up. It was an explosion that carried a few percent of the atomic explosion over Hiroshima. So quite a very bright fireball. And from analyzing the data, we concluded that the object disintegrated or burned up only in the lower atmosphere. And that means that it was made of a very tough material, in fact, a few times tougher than iron. So either it's an unusual rock because it was the toughest among all the meteors in the government catalog, or maybe it's artificial in origin, a spacecraft made of some alloy that can survive much harsher conditions than a stony meteorite. So we don't know, and therefore we are planning an expedition to the location where this explosion happened. It was 100 miles off the coast of Papua New Guinea, and the fragments from the explosion landed on the ocean floor. So I got fully funded to pursue an expedition that will survey the ocean floor, look for the fragments in about half a year before summer 2023. And we could tell from the fragments that we find whether it was artificial or natural in origin. And that became part of a new project that I established called the Galileo project. So this is one part of it. Another one is to look for more objects like Oumuamua and then get close to them with a camera so that we can get a high resolution image of them. And the third branch of the Galileo project is to look for objects in the sky, the atmosphere of the Earth, where the US government claims they see unidentified objects. They don't know what they are. And we will try to identify them using a suite of cameras and telescopes and sensors that we already put together. And we are already starting to get data. And the data will come 24/7 and will be of the entire sky. And we'll put these instruments in several locations and try to explain the unexplained.
And I understand some of these objects that the Navy has been reporting about actually go into the water a lot of the time. And the submarines might actually detect them underwater, but it might be confidential for national defense reasons. So do you expect to possibly find anything of that nature potentially when you're doing these underwater explorations?
Well, the US Congress decided to establish a new office in government that will collect all the data reported by military personnel. And in the definition of the scope of this office, they mentioned also not only objects in the atmosphere, but in the air, but also potentially objects in space or underwater. And that relates to what you asked. They presumably have some data, although we haven't seen it because it's classified, that reported about objects entering the water possibly. But the data is classified. So there are two possibilities: either to wait for the government to release data, which can imply waiting forever. It's just like the play by Samuel Beckett, Waiting for Godot. You can wait forever and it will never come. The alternative that I adapted with the Galileo project is to collect our own data that will be open to the public and will analyze it in an open way, transparent way, so everyone can look at it. And for that, we purchased new instruments, and I received funding from private donors that allow us to pursue that. And the sky is not classified. It's only the sensors that the government is using that are classified, and they don't want to reveal the quality of the images to adversaries. And that's why, for national security purposes, they don't release the data. But we assemble instruments off the shelf and look at parts of the sky that are not classified, and Therefore, we could tell in principle if there is anything unusual. Of course, I mean, it will be a mixed bag. There are two types of objects that obviously are out there. These are natural objects like insects, birds, thunderstorms. But then there are also human-made objects like weather balloons, drones, airplanes, satellites, rockets. And the question is whether there is anything else. And what we know from the sketchy data that was reported, is very little. We don't know how much the government actually knows, and the government is not a scientific organization. They are not. Their main purpose is national security and protecting the safety of military personnel. It's not finding evidence for something that came out of this earth.
That is true. And a lot of people say, well, we shouldn't be worried about this kind of stuff or even bother researching it because there's been evidence for centuries that these things have possibly been observing us or visiting us, and it hasn't really seemed to affected us too much in an obvious way at this point. Do you think that it is something that should be ignored? Obviously not if you're trying to get the funds to research it itself. But I know some of your fellow scientists wish that this kind of thing had never been brought to attention of the public.
Well, it's irrelevant what specific people say. What matters is what is the reality that we live in. And, scientific research is driven by curiosity. So if there are intriguing facts, we want to find more evidence about it so that we can figure it out. It's just like a kid trying to figure out something in the world, and the adults in the room either know the answer in advance or dismiss the question. And I was always frustrated by that, because science is supposed to be driven by curiosity. If there is something unusual, let's figure it out by getting more data. And the argument that it didn't affect us is not a good argument because, nuclear energy was never ignited on Earth until we understood nuclear physics. So you might say, okay, why develop nuclear physics? Well, now we know that it can be used to harness energy. So we have nuclear reactors in principle, and, that can help us. The same is true about Einstein's theory of gravity. It was developed for just intellectual curiosity, explaining the nature of space and time. And then 100 years later, it's used in GPS systems. So you would never be able to navigate on the streets with a GPS system in your car if Albert Einstein was not curious about the nature of space and time. Obviously someone else could have done it, but I'm just saying it was curiosity driven. And you might argue, well, I never needed a GPS system when I was 50,000 years ago in the jungles in Africa. Humans didn't need GPSs. Fine, we can always remain in the Stone Age. But the point is that by realizing what reality is, we are advancing our quality of life. And here is another example. The two of us would never speak if quantum mechanics was not discovered about a century ago, because the computer system, the internet, cell phones, everything that we use on a daily basis was developed thanks to our understanding of quantum mechanics. And so you might say, well, we never used quantum mechanics before a century ago, so why even bother? It doesn't affect our life. Well, guess what? If you understand it, it does affect your life, and in a very positive way. So the point is that something that was not recognized until a given point in time and didn't affect our life is not necessarily implying that we should not seek understanding of it. On the contrary, the more we understand it, the more knowledge we gain about reality, the better we can adapt to it. And, the same is true about let's say COVID-19, the virus. If we didn't understand what a virus is, we would never have vaccines for it. And the hospitals would be full of people dying, many more than actually did. So the point is that understanding reality allows us to behave in a more appropriate way. Another example, people thought for 1,000 years that the sun moves around the earth, after Aristotle said that. And you might say, okay, well, who cares if the sun moves around the earth or the earth moves around the sun? Who cares about it? It doesn't affect our life, whatever it is. Well, it does affect your life, because if you want to reach, for example, Mars, or if you want to reach the moon, and you have the wrong idea about the motion of objects in the sky, you will never reach your destination. You can launch as many spacecraft as you want, and people that believe that the sun moves around the earth, they would never reach Mars. They would never be able to figure out what the situation is in reality of the earth, Mars, the moon, the planets, and everything else. So my point is, by figuring out what reality is, even if before figuring it out you didn't know it and it didn't affect your life, after figuring it out, it changes completely the way that you behave, and it makes your life better because you understand the reality that you live in. And that should be true also for finding if extraterrestrial probes are around us, because it will change the way we think about ourselves, our place in the universe. It will change our aspirations for space. It could affect religious, philosophical beliefs of people. It would have a huge impact. So saying that we shouldn't think about it just because it didn't affect your life, it's just like saying that we should have never left the jungle and developed our understanding of reality since then. That would have left us just like animals.
And there does seem to be some evidence of high-ranking military officials saying that there was some correlation with nuclear silos being affected by some of these unidentified craft flying over them for periods of time. So,
well,
that
that's
might be
there are discussions of that, but one should keep in mind that so far the reports on unusual objects, the number of reports was proportional to the number of people looking at the sky at a given area. So if you think about it, there are many cameras and also the military patrolling areas that are of strategic importance, okay? And those areas would be the most reported about. So when people say, oh, there are lots of reports around, military zones, war zones, or nuclear plants and so forth, or near military facilities, one should keep in mind that these are the places where there are lots of eyes on the sky all the time. And so you would naturally find things. And some of them may have nothing to do with extraterrestrial origin. They may have to do with other people spying on these areas or doing something. So the first thing to do is go to a place which is remote and has no strategic importance and see if the same activity happens there. It's natural that we will find things where we look, but we should look at other places as well.
good point. There's a fan on here that wants to know if the universe is expanding, would that make it less likely to make contact with extraterrestrials? I have heard that some of these things could potentially be interdimensional.
Okay. No, so interdimensional is a complete speculation. Let's not even talk about it, because we don't know if extra dimensions exist. And moreover, we have no idea how you can move between them. So it's a complete speculation. You can think of it as poetry. Okay, so anyone can say anything about it. We have no direct evidence. But the issue of the universe expanding, yes, it would affect our ability to communicate with extraterrestrial civilizations that are not in our galaxy, because our own galaxy, the Milky Way, is not expanding with the universe. It's sufficiently dense so that the material inside the Milky Way keeps itself bound thanks to its self-gravity, its own gravity. So it remains bound. Just like the solar system doesn't expand with the universe because the sun provides enough gravity to keep it bound. But distant galaxies that are far away from us, are not bound to us, and they expand relative to us with the rest of the universe. So if there are civilizations in other galaxies, if we ever detect any signals from them, it will only be for some time, because eventually they will expand and the universe away from us, and the universe is expanding at an accelerated rate. So the expansion rate is increasing with time. So actually any distant galaxy eventually will recede away from us faster than light. And nothing can move faster than light, so we will not receive any signals from them beyond a certain time in the future. But within our own galaxy, the Milky Way, there are tens of billions of stars like the sun, and we know that a significant fraction of them, somewhere between 3% and 100%, have a planet like the Earth roughly at the same separation. So we could have a lot of partners just in our galactic club, just within the Milky Way galaxy, and they will remain in the same environment as we are. And they are not expanding with the universe. It's only other galaxies that are running away from us. So it's just like saying we have some people at home. These are the people we will stay with, and distant neighbors will go away.
Philip has a question. If you have any working hypothesis about how an alien intelligence might behave.
Yeah, so I think it will be very different from science fiction stories in the sense that creatures like ourselves, biological creatures, were not selected for survival in space. The conditions are really harsh. Even if you go to Mars, Mars has a very thin atmosphere, so it doesn't protect you. And the bombardment by energetic particles, just being on the surface of Mars for a few years, will kill any person who goes there. So the only way to survive on Mars or anywhere in space for more than a few years, unprotected by the atmosphere of the Earth, unprotected by the magnetic field of the Earth that usually blocks a lot of these particles, that cannot happen for longer than a few years. And so people that go to Mars will have to go into caves in order to protect themselves by the rock above them. But in space, if you go on a spacecraft, you need to put a very thick layer of protection around you, and it's not simple. So my point is, it makes much more sense to send instruments that have their own artificial intelligence. So now we have AI systems that are almost on the path to driving cars. So I can imagine in the future we'll have AI astronauts, and they could be autonomous. Not only that they can survive in space for a long time, they can also make decisions on their own without waiting for guidance, because the distance across the Milky Way galaxy is so vast that it takes light, the fastest moving thing, it takes it tens of thousands of years to traverse the galaxy. So humans will have to go through a very large number of generations on a spacecraft. That makes little sense. They might not survive. It makes much more sense to send an electronic system. And so if I were to imagine something reaching us from, let's say, that was launched 1 billion years ago by some other civilization, because most stars formed billions of years before the sun. So just imagine something on a journey for millions or billions of years. It would most likely have an AI astronaut on it, some electronic gadget that thinks for itself, is autonomous, if it's still working. If it's a piece of trash, space trash, then it could be anything. Like the spacecraft that we launched 5 probes into interstellar space, and within 1 billion years, they will not be functional. They will be just junk. So we could find things like that. But if I imagine an encounter with something that is functional, it will probably be equipped with artificial intelligence and some technologies that we haven't developed yet, because most likely they're much more advanced than we are.
When are you planning to begin the Galileo project, and are you going to take a leave from your job at Harvard during that time to focus on it?
Well, it already started a year and a few months ago. It's fully funded. I'm still at Harvard, and I'm doing it as part of my research program as an astronomer. And there are about 100 people involved, and almost 1,000 that volunteered to be part of it. So we're making a lot of progress. As I mentioned, by now we have one suite of instruments working and collecting data, and we are starting to analyze it. And hopefully in the coming year, we'll have something to report about.
Do you think there's been an increase in sightings of UAPs and things of that nature because technology has increased, or do you think that potentially there's just more activity now?
No, I think it has to do with the better instruments we have, because if you go back 50 years, the data that could have been collected was not of high quality. The images are fuzzy, and now we have much better instruments. But at the same time, we also have evasive technologies. We have drones that didn't exist a long time ago. And so our sky is polluted with technological gadgets that humans produced. And the key is to sort them out and look for something else. And that is more of a challenge now, because there are many more objects in the sky. In addition to airplanes, there are drones, weather balloons, and satellites are being the communication satellite population is rising to will be rising to tens of thousands in the coming years. So we'll have to distinguish those human-made objects from anything else, but we have much better instruments. So an illustration of that is only over the past decade we could identify interstellar meteors like the one that I mentioned, or Oumuamua like objects. That was possible only over the past decade with the new instruments, the new telescopes and sensors that we have, and it was not possible before that. So when Enrico Fermi asked 70 years ago, he asked, where is everybody, when he was having lunch at Los Alamos and talking about extraterrestrials. He was wondering, where are they? But he didn't make an effort to look for anything in the sky. And now we have much better instruments. So I think the increase in the discussions and the numbers of reports is simply a reflection of the better instruments we have. Whether they are extraterrestrial or not, these objects that the government is talking about, remains to be seen. I mean, maybe they have good enough data, but I haven't seen it because it's classified. So hopefully in the coming years, we'll be able to tell.
Is this extraterrestrial subject something that you became interested in only after you've done research and discovered that this could be a possibility, or is this something you were interested in since you were young?
No, I was I was not interested when I was young. I also didn't like science fiction because many times the stories violate the laws of physics, and I'm a physicist, so it bothered me. I couldn't enjoy the storylines. I became interested as a result of the discovery of Oumuamua, which looked weird to me. And you can think of me as the kid who said the emperor has no clothes, where all the adults were saying, oh, of course, it's a beautiful clothing that the emperor has, in the story of Hans Christian Andersen. So I just refused to say that this object that looked so unusual is a rock. It looked to me so unusual that it could have been made by a technological civilization. And so I stated that. And after that, we discovered the meteor. And now there is a second meteor that we discovered. So all of that brought me to the subject. And also the US government reported about the unidentified objects recently over the past year. So that was added to the list of things that I would like to figure out. And I'm just curious about it, that's all. And it's coming from a scientific perspective, where I want to figure it out, getting better data.
Have you done much research in the field of consciousness?
No. If you ask me what I think consciousness is, I would say that we will figure it out as soon as artificial intelligence systems become sentient. And By sentient, what I mean is that when you chat with an AI system, you won't be able to tell whether it's a person or a computer. And that's the so-called Turing test. But now we can have this test, with millions of people and over many years. And we are almost there. The latest GPT chat is showing that the AI systems can write essays quite well, not very different from humans. And I wouldn't be surprised if within the next decade there will be a sentient AI systems. And then you ask yourself, okay, well, if you can't tell the difference between a human and a computer, is there really a difference? I'm talking about a fundamental sense, not of course the computer is built of completely different materials than the human body. It's not a biological system, but if it shows up in a similar way, I would argue that consciousness is just an emergent phenomenon. It's our brain is so complex that it gives rise to what we call consciousness, but it's nothing more than hardware, just like the hardware of a computer that gives rise to a sentient AI system. So at that point, when we will have sentient AI systems, which could be less than a decade away, society will have to adjust to that. We will have to change the legal system, because you're not supposed to kill sentient systems. So you're not supposed to pull a trigger and kill a person. That's against the law. And in the same way, you will not be allowed to unplug a sentient computer, a sentient AI system from the wall, because that's just like killing it.
And that brings up another question from Michael Collins, and he wants to know if humanity will be lost or enhanced if we create the AI systems.
I think it will only be enhanced. One thing I learned from raising my two daughters is that now, as they grew, I don't always understand them, but I'm always proud of their accomplishments. And I have the same sentiments to our technological kids, the gadgets that we developed. So if we develop sentient AI systems and they win in all possible games against humans, in chess and whatever you might think about, and they do better than humans in many tasks, and they replace humans on many fronts, I will just be proud of them. We can always control the parameters of in which they operate, and I think it's always better for us, because it will relieve us. We can have more vacation time if they can do administrative jobs. Society as a whole will be better off. There are many ethical questions about that, like if, for example, they would replace doctors in giving prescriptions, medical prescriptions, and if someone dies, who do you put in jail? If it's a computer, what do you do about it? There are all kinds of questions, but overall, I think, anytime we develop new technologies, we benefited, as long as we made sure that they would serve us rather than hurt us. If you think about nuclear energy, obviously two things came out of it. One is nuclear reactors that are good for us. In principle, they generate energy, and 90% of the energy production in France, for example, comes from nuclear reactors. But at the same time, they pose a threat, because someone can use nuclear weapons. Putin was talking about it. So the question is, there are good things and bad things that you can do with any discovery, and we just have to make sure that it's being used for the better purpose. And that, of course, is always a struggle, but I think overall we benefit.
Someone was asking earlier if you think the world would be ready for the news of potential extraterrestrial life with higher technologies than us, and us not being the center of the universe. Do you think the civilizations would be panicked, or do you think at this point they'd be ready to accept it with an open mind?
No, I think what will happen at first is that people will just continue with their daily routine and ignore it. Most people, and many scientists would be very critical of any such finding and dismiss it. But once there is good enough evidence, like for example, suppose the Galileo project obtains a high-resolution image of an object in the sky, and we can see the screws and bolts on its surface, so it's not a bird, it's not a biological creature, and then it maneuvers in ways that cannot be reproduced by human-made technologies. I mean, that's very simple. We rule out a natural origin, and we also rule out a human-made technological gadget because it behaves in or it has properties that we cannot reproduce. That's a possible scenario. So then the only question is, how good is the evidence? And if we keep seeing it and we record it with many cameras in the infrared, optical, radio, audio, eventually nobody can deny it. Okay. Another possibility, suppose there is another object like Oumuamua, and we design a space mission that lands on it, and we see some buttons on it. So it's clearly not a rock. We can press a button. So, there are situations where any reasonable person will not be able to deny it. But it will take a while to get to that point because such a process requires funding. When people say extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, they have to understand that extraordinary evidence requires extraordinary funding. That's fully understood in the context of science because some of the most important discoveries require huge amounts of funding, billions of dollars, and sometimes we don't find what we are looking for. And there are many examples for that, like the Large Hadron Collider cost $10 billion, and in addition to the Higgs boson that it found, it was looking for supersymmetry. It didn't find it. And so there are examples where we put billions of dollars, don't find what we are expecting. That's part of science. But the point is, without putting the billions of dollars, we would never get to the point where we can check for it. And so when people say there is no extraordinary evidence, well, there wasn't an extraordinary evidence for supersymmetry to start with. It was just in the heads of those theoretical physicists who suggested it, but we haven't found it. So that shows it's not real. And therefore, the only way for us to figure it out was by investing those billions of dollars and doing the experiment. And so if we know that we exist, which we know, and we know that we launched probes to interstellar space, which we know, and we know that a significant fraction of all the stars like the sun have a planet like the Earth, and those stars formed billions of years before the sun, then it's a completely reasonable possibility that we would find spacecraft nearby that came from far away, because they sent them more than 1 billion years ago. And within 1 billion years, even a chemical rocket can traverse the entire Milky Way galaxy. So the question of whether we have any probes in our cosmic neighborhood is not a philosophical question. It's just a question of looking through telescopes, putting the money towards this research. That's what the Galileo project is trying to do. But we have limited funds, and I'm saying, obviously, it will be difficult to get extraordinary evidence unless there are more funds allocated for it.
Someone on here is asking about Antarctica. We've heard speculation, since that hasn't been an area that has been studied that much, that there could potentially be UFO activity there. What do you know about that, if anything?
Well, that's an excellent point. And in fact, within the Galileo project, we are getting data from Planet Labs. This is commercial data that is not classified. It's available from a set of satellites that are monitoring the Earth. And we are planning to examine the images over Antarctica because for two reasons. One, there aren't many human-made crafts out there, airplanes or drones flying above it. Also, there aren't many animals on that part of the globe. But more importantly, the background is white. And so in principle, you can see things flying over it because of the contrast, and you can see the shadow. So we will definitely examine those images. And again, just wait a year and we'll let you know if we find anything.
And I've heard you say that humans will eventually need to look at colonizing other areas other than Earth because it's only a matter of time, probably a long time, but still a matter of time before it won't be inhabitable. I guess you must be a supporter of Elon Musk's colonization of Mars then. And what other things do you think humans need to begin to work on to resolve this potential problem in the future?
Well, I have one difference from the approach that Elon is taking. He is thinking about big rockets and big missions that are quite expensive. I think a much better approach is to send small spacecraft that are smart, that are not expensive, and you can send many of them, let's say thousands or millions. And in fact, we are exploring that possibility. And in an organization called the Copernicus Space Initiative. And we might pursue it in the coming years. And the idea is that if you wanted to learn about Earth, you wouldn't put one probe to examine Earth. You would put many that go to different locations because conditions vary on Earth. And the same is true for any other object in the solar system that you may wish to study. And as I said, it's a little bit premature to send humans because, first of all, it's very expensive to send humans to protect them and so forth. And second, they might not survive. And, it's better for us to learn about those harsh environments from gadgets, electronic gadgets that are visiting them and sending us information before we go there ourselves. And as much as Elon wants to die on Mars, I wouldn't wish it for him. I would rather study Mars carefully before he goes there and build the infrastructure necessary for him to survive there for a while. I wish him good health, and I don't want him to die on the first trip there.
Could you tell us about your Black Hole Initiative project that you were involved with?
Right. I should also mention that I just completed my next book as a follow-up to Extraterrestrial. It's called Interstellar by HarperCollins. If you just type Avi Loeb, Interstellar, HarperCollins, you will find it. And it should come out on August 29th, 2023. Now, at Harvard, I served in several leadership roles. And I was chair of the astronomy department for 9 years, the longest serving chair between 2011 and 2020. During that time, I was the founding director of the Black Hole Initiative, which was inaugurated in 2016 in the company of Stephen Hawking that came to my home at the time. And that is the only center worldwide focused on the study of black holes. And it brings together astronomers, mathematicians, physicists, and philosophers who are all interested in black holes. And the first image of a black hole in M87 that was highly publicized a few years ago was derived actually in the conference room of the Black Hole Initiative at Harvard. So I was very happy to see that. I'm also still the director of the Institute for Theory and Computation at Harvard. And I also served other leadership roles. For example, I'm chairing the scientific advisory board of the Breakthrough Starshot Initiative, which is a project to send small probes of the type that I mentioned before to the nearest star, Proxima Centauri, as an example, or other nearby stars, but so that they will get there, the probes, within our lifetime. And that means within decades. But the nearest star is 4 light years away. So in order for the probe to get there, let's say in 20 years, it needs to move at a fifth of the speed of light. And that's very fast. That's a factor of 1,000 faster than chemical rockets. And the question is, how do we get to a speed of a fifth of the speed of light? And the only way to do that is by pushing a sail with light, just like I was talking before about Oumuamua. But if you make the sail very lightweight and you shine a very powerful laser on it, then within a few minutes you can bring it to the speed, the speed that is a fifth of the speed of light, and it will get to the nearest stars within decades. So that's the Starshot initiative, and we're currently working on the technologies necessary to make it happen.
And you mentioned Stephen Hawking's. I saw the video where he's saying he was against the government sending out signals into the atmosphere for potential extraterrestrials to pick us up, because he said it could be dangerous if one maybe finds out about us with negative intentions and decides to do something that wouldn't be good for us. What are your thoughts on that? And also, what was it like being around someone like Stephen?
Yeah, so I don't agree with what he said, because well, first of all, we sent radio signals already for 70 years and or for a century by now, but and of course those signals move out, and eventually anyone that has sensitive radio telescopes could see them. But my point is that most likely other civilizations are far more advanced than we are if they're capable of detecting radio signals, because most stars formed billions of years before the sun, and we just had our science and technology for 1 century, and they probably have much more sophisticated equipment. So thinking that if we transmit radio signals, they would see us, and if not, they won't, is really naive. I think they could have arrived here and eliminated us very early on, before we came to exist technologically, and they didn't do that. I don't think we pose a threat to them, because we are so primitive relative to what we might be in the future. If you just imagine us, instead of 1 century after the discovery of quantum mechanics and Einstein's gravity, if you imagine like 1,000 years from now or 1,000,000 years from now, that it would really dwarf anything we can think of, and the means of communication would be different. Just think about a cave dweller coming to New York City and looking around. I mean, obviously that cave dweller will have no idea. It would look like magic to the cave dweller what happens. So just thinking that at the current stage of our technological development we pose a threat, or they might want to destroy us, is naive, because it's when a biker goes on the pavement, on a sidewalk, the biker often doesn't pay attention to the colony of ants that come out of the cracks in the pavement. It's completely irrelevant. So I would argue that we are probably unimportant and not so significant. In fact, we might hear back from them once we start going into interstellar space. Once we reach interstellar space, we might hear a message saying, "Welcome to the Interstellar Club." And that would enhance our ranking among intelligent civilization. At this point in time, they might think that we are not that intelligent. In fact, we are wasting a lot of energy fighting each other. We are destroying our planet. We do not necessarily operate in a way that an intelligent civilization should.
Yes, that's definitely true. Do you have any thoughts on this Neil deGrasse Tyson that seems to be very anti this type of research, and he gets a lot of publicity for talking negative about it?
Yeah, well, he doesn't do research, irrespective of whether it has to do with extraterrestrials or other parts of astronomy. I didn't see his name on a scientific paper for about 15 years. So my point is, what matters is the research, not what people say about it.
Now, you've been on the President's Council of Advisors for Science and Technology for a few years now. Do you work and have any direct discussions with the president in this? And what does that role actually involve?
No, with the Galileo project, we prefer at this point not to engage with any classified information because that would limit the openness of the entire endeavor. I mean, we won't be able to openly report about our data. So at the moment, we are avoiding anything classified, and I'm not in contact with any government official that has classified data. That's the situation right now.
There's someone on here says that you mentioned earlier the Goldilocks zone of habitual planets in our galaxy. Are there any specific qualities of planets that you could host specifically intelligent life beyond microbes and such?
Yeah, so we have to remember that what astronomers call as habitable zones are those zones, those regions where a planet like the Earth, which is rocky, that has an atmosphere and has water on it, will have liquid water on its surface. And that's a very limited definition. It's life as we know it here on Earth. So we're asking, what's the chance that an object will be as big as the Earth in the region where the host star, will warm it up so that it will have liquid water, because the chemistry of life as we know it depends on liquid water. Now, the first thing we realize in the solar system itself, there are moons like Enceladus or Europa or Titan that have liquid water under the icy surface. So their surface temperature is maybe a third of that of the Earth because they're farther away. Titan is 10 times the distance of the Earth from the sun, and the others are a bit closer, but still far away. So they are colder on the surface. Everything, water would freeze on the surface, but under the surface, under a thick layer of ice, we know that there is liquid water based on data that we have. And in fact, in moons like Enceladus or Europa, we see plumes of water vapor coming out of the cracks in the ice. So we know definitely that there is an ocean down there. And an interesting question is whether that could support life. And we don't know because we didn't visit those places and studied the oceans under the surface. But if there is life there, then it expands the range of habitability, because there are many more frozen worlds than worlds in the habitable zone around stars. So it might be the most abundant form of life, not life as we know it, but under the ice, subsurface life. And the other thing to keep in mind is Titan has oceans of methane on its surface, and the methane and ethane. And this could give rise to life as we don't know it in principle. So you could also imagine that liquid water is not the only liquid that can allow life to exist. That's what we find here on Earth. But here is an object, Titan, that has an atmosphere mostly of nitrogen, just like the Earth. But then there are oceans, seas, and rivers of methane, liquid methane, at a surface temperature that is 1/3 of that on Earth, 94 degrees above absolute zero. It's completely freezing out there, but methane can exist in liquid form. So the question is, can you have chemistry of life in such a fluid? And that would be life as we don't know it. So that's the other possibility, that we are not fully understanding the scope of life in the universe.
Just to wind it down here, I know you're Israeli. A couple of years ago, the former Israeli general who apparently was in charge of space security came out with a book, and I'm not sure if it's been translated into English yet, but it made international news where he claimed that there was a galactic federation of aliens and made some pretty outrageous claims as far as various governments being in contact with extraterrestrials. What are your thoughts on that?
So, as a scientist, I respond to evidence, and he didn't show any evidence. He just made claims. So, suppose a person comes forward and says, I'm Napoleon. What do you do about it? You ask for the person's ID card. And if it doesn't show Napoleon, there are places for such people. So my point is, without the evidence, there is nothing to discuss here. If he came forward with documents that substantiate what he says, then I would take it quite seriously. It may well be, just like with classified documents that the government has, it may well be that there is something behind it, but I haven't seen it. Therefore, there is nothing to discuss. Just by people making statements or claims, we cannot make progress. We have to see the evidence for that.
Are you surprised at how internationally famous you've become since the Oumuamua revelation first went public? You're probably one of the best known scientists in the world right now. Not that you weren't among the scientific community before, but now you're known by the mainstream public.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the evidence for that, I was in two public events last month, and in one of them, there was an Iranian born entrepreneur that approached me and asked me for a selfie. And I said, sure. And then the following morning, she showed up and said, did you know that there are hundreds of Iranian women scientists that are following your work because they wrote to me after I posted it on Instagram? Now, since I was born in Israel, that was a complete surprise to me. And what it demonstrates is that the interest in extraterrestrial life unites people, irrespective of national borders. People all over the world are curious about it, are passionate about it. And that's what I want to learn about. And that seems to appeal to a lot of people. And I'm surprised. Yes, I'm surprised. I came out of a taxi in an event that was at the Washington National Cathedral together with a panel that had Jeff Bezos there and Avril Haines, the Director of National Intelligence, and also Bill Nelson, the head of NASA. And when I left the taxi, immediately a person came to me and said, are you Avi Loeb? Can I have a selfie? So it does look like people recognize me. That's a complete surprise because I didn't try to get to become popular. I don't have any footprint on social media. I'm just trying to follow my common sense. And the fact that others are not doing it is a surprise to me. I'm not trying to be controversial or bullish. I'm just trying to follow my common sense. And if everyone would agree and it wouldn't be unusual and I wouldn't be known, that would be even better for me. But for some reason, it's noticed because not many people are doing it.
And you mentioned you have no social media footprint. How can people find out more about the Galileo project if they want to donate? How can they do that and follow all the developments? And also, I know Amazon, people can find your books, but maybe you could share that information.
Right. So we have a website of the Galileo project, and there is a button there saying support us. And if you're interested in donations, there is a way to do that. And if the donation is bigger than several tens of thousands, then you can email me directly. And in terms of how to find out what's happening, I post commentaries on Medium almost every couple of days, every few days. And if you follow them, you will see everything that is important that is happening. And so basically just Google Avi Loeb Medium, and you will find those essays. There are many of them from recent weeks.
Well, it's been an honor and a privilege to talk to you. And I hope maybe in a year or two, if there's more Galileo projects developments, maybe you could come back on and share more information. But I'll let you close this off with whatever message you want to tell the fans here in Canada. It's mostly a wrestling channel, but we actually have a lot of people interested in UFOs. In this
well, I do feel very often that I'm wrestling with people that don't have common sense. So I completely sympathize with you, and I jog every morning for half an hour at 5 a.m. at sunrise. So I like sports quite a lot. But what I would like, the message I would like to convey is that, you know, I pretty much my hope is with the young people of today, and my message to them is, if you go to the beach and you look at seashells, the young seashells that were just swept ashore, they have their unique colors and shapes that they were born with. And the old seashells rubbed against each other as the ocean waves brought them back and forth, and they broke up into indistinguishable pieces. And I just hope that the young people will preserve their unique colors, not rub against each other too often, and, you know, just be passionate always about their childhood curiosity, not give up, because that's what I'm trying to do throughout my life.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button.